I mentioned something earlier about the area light being the only type of light that exists in the real world, and in this lesson I'm gonna show you why that is the case. And this is what I want to highlight: the fact that the area light, depending on its shape, size, and distance to our object, that is going to affect how the lighting and shadows look. This was the first example, just a rectangle setup. I changed the shape to a disk, and already you can see a slight difference. Then I made the disk shape much smaller, and you see that created this much more dramatic style, both in terms of how the light wraps around our sphere, and it also created this much more defined shadow compared to previously. Then I put the size of the disk back up to this here, but I moved it further away, and once again you see that affects how the lighting looks. Let's see the setup for that in Cinema 4D. I'm going to get an area light, just move it up and above our object again. Let's do a quick target setup. In the light settings, the type needs to be set to area, and I'm also going to put the shadows as area 2. Let's go to the details tab. This is where we change the settings for the shape. I'm going to make sure that this is going to be seen in the render and also as a solid in the viewport, so we actually see how it looks. And to start with, I'm just going to render this to the picture viewer. So next up, let's change the area shape to disk and render this out. And already that small change makes a difference. And what's happening here is the fact that, a disk shape is slightly smaller in area surface to a rectangle, of the same height and width. And because it's smaller, it actually makes this shadow a bit more defined than before. And of course, as we've already seen, if we make this much smaller using the size X and Y here, you can also change it using the outer radius, which controls both values at the same time. And that render looks much more dramatic. So this would be more like a, like a torchlight or something, whereas this is more like a softbox in a studio, much larger relative to its subject. And anyway, finally, we can go back and do 200 centimeters, but make it further from the object. And we get this kind of thing. And so what we are observing here is exactly how lights behave in the real world. This example in particular would be like if you stepped outside on a bright sunny day, and I live in England, so I don't get many opportunities to do that. But on the rare occasion I get the chance, if I stood outside in the sun, it's the reason why the sun produces a harsher lighting style with well-defined shadows, because even though physically the sun is a very large object, and I hope I'm not breaking any news, with that information, but the sun is very large. However, it's also very far away. And so when we look up at it in the sky, it's actually just a small disk shape relative to the much larger sky around it. And so that's why we get this kind of lighting from the sun. And in contrast to that, would be this example, which would be similar to, let's say, a softbox in a photography studio, because it's much closer to the subject and it's much bigger, relatively speaking, area-wise. It creates this much softer lighting style. And, that's the reason why photographers use these kind of lights for portrait, photography, for example. So I say all of this, not to turn this into some kind of amateur lesson about, the physics of the sun or photography. I just wanted to highlight this particular property of the area light, which is that, its size, shape, and distance will affect how your lighting looks. So if you understand that at that very technical level, then of course it helps with, if you're trying to create renders that look more realistic, then you know how to set up your area lights properly. And also, creatively, once again, if you understand exactly how all of this works, then it just gives you that greater degree of control with your lights in Cinema 4D.